Hey everybody, I'm Adam Birch, and this is my boy,
Don Crandall.
and we're here with another episode of Half in the Bag!
No, it's where in hell do we go from here?
Where in hell do we go from here? And today we're going to be talking about Star Wars, because there's been some news in the news for Star Wars, and they're having their Europe, their big conference in Europe, so there's some news coming out of there.
Right.
And but one thing before we started talking about that I wanted to mention was that coming out of San Diego Comic-Con last weekend, Warner Brothers announced that they are going to go ahead with a Superman-Batman team-up movie.
Right.
So obviously they were listening to our video log.
Yeah, I was wondering if we should, seek legal action. I don't know. Did they steal our idea?
It's certainly possible that they have. Mm-hmm.
I kept watching us, and then just a week later, plotting it all out.
I know.
So it's a real coincidence.
But I think it's good. Superman, Batman, obviously, them thinking Justice League too much to take on, probably to introduce all those heroes, Superman and Batman,
right.
At least with the Dark Knight and now Man of Steel have been strong tentpole productions for them. They know that they can get people in the theater. Those characters have already had origins told of them, so it's sort of like the gateway into a Justice League.
Right. I like it, obviously. That's what I was talking about last time. But look, we'll see what happens. I'm thumbs up for
right.
me.
And hopefully they'll keep listening to this blog, and maybe they'll, the people over at Bad Robot and Disney will be listening to this when we're talking about Star Wars Day.
Right.
So obviously we all know that there's going to be a new Star Wars trilogy.
Okay.
A sequel trilogy to the original trilogy, as well as several spin-off movies, one-shots, chronicling perhaps Boba Fett, like a solo story. And we also know that there's going to be the animated cartoon series Rebels, right? Rebels,
right.
Which is sort of now, they've killed the defunct Clone Wars cartoon, unfortunately.
Yeah, sad.
When it was starting to get good, I definitely thought Clone Wars was kind of a mixed bag. They had several episodes about Jar Jar and the droids that I could have done without. Right. But they're going ahead with Rebels. But let's talk about the movies, what's going on.
Okay.
So, the first thing, obviously, where in the hell do we go from here?
With Episode VII.
With Episode VII.
Okay.
So we know that there is an entire expanded universe out there that, pretty much picks up right after the destruction of the second Death Star.
Return of the Jedi.
After Return of the Jedi, with the
books.
The Truce at Baccarat was the first chronological book.
Mm-hmm.
I've pretty much read every single one of those series. There's been a few exceptions. The Paul Kemp books I haven't read. I haven't read some of the X-Wing.
I don't know. I never kept
Raid Squad. So that's good. See, I know this whole EU, and you kind of have dabbled a little bit. You've read Dark Empire. You read that.
I did the EU during the original trilogy, the expanded universe, the books, comics.
The Marvel comics.
Certainly all the Marvels. The first few books. I think after the Heir to the Empire, I kind of tuned out. I don't know. Maybe I just matured or something.
So here, yeah. Well, got oversaturated, and I think that's going to be the big concern with Star Wars is whether or not fans are over it.
Okay.
We had 3 movies that were, arguably bad, mediocre to bad, bad to mediocre.
Prequels,
the
right.
The prequels.
Real quick, I stand by the prequels a little bit in that they're on their own. They're fun, entertaining films. I like the prequels, but I should have loved them. Like I love the old ones. So in that respect, they're disappointing. But I'm not a prequel hater.
You're smoking crack, buddy. Those movies are bad.
He's a prequel hater.
Yeah, no, I'm not a prequel hater. Here's the thing.
I'm a little more tolerant.
The big ideas of the prequels, which are having a tragic, heroic arc. Luke Skywalker being sort of the monomyth.
Okay.
And Lucas doing sort of the same thing with Anakin Skywalker, but more in the vein of like Oedipus Rex, you know, like
the Oedipus cycle.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think that's a brilliant idea, putting it in a space fantasy realm. I think it's a brilliant idea. It was with the original trilogy.
Right.
I think it was with the prequel trilogy. And you go through the entire heroic cycle, making the, expanding what we thought of as the original trilogy, turning it, you're like, oh, wow, this, the character of Darth Vader is tragic. And, oh, the stormtroopers are really clones of this Mandalorian warrior. That's pretty cool.
Right.
It was just the abysmal execution of awful dialogue, terrible ideas, in terms of like comic relief.
Okay.
I mean, really, it was just awful. I mean, if he had done something where he had, sort of said, this is the big idea, these are the big ideas, and then had people who were creatively sort of executing it, I think it would have been a whole lot better. I don't think those movies would have been as bad.
Right. Okay. Well, yeah, we could talk.
But let's move. I mean, let's move on
about the prequels that we have.
Right. People have talked about them ad
we won't
nauseum
waste
at
your
this point.
time.
Exactly. So what the question is? What do we want to see from a new series of movies?
Right.
I mean, do you have any thoughts about where the hell do we go from here?
You're
J.J. Abrams and Michael Arndt, and you get to design the new trilogy. What do you do?
What would I do?
Mm-hmm.
Well, the hot topic is should they include or acknowledge or pick pieces of the expanded universe, the books and comics and games and so forth? And my answer is no.
No.
I want to see something completely different. To quote in the commentary track for one of the Star Trek movies, Ronald D. Moore, one of the writers, and Brandon Braga, the other writer, were saying that their toughest problem in coming up with new Star Trek stories was all the continuity they had to adhere to, and they thought they should just reboot it. So in a way, reboot the EU and just start a new. It's a real hindrance. I'm sure it is.
Well, and here I'm going to agree with you, Don.
Okay.
And ironically, I'm ironically agreeing with you only because when we discussed Clone Wars so much when that show was out, I was the one saying, man, I wasted all this money on these comics in between episodes 2 and 3, only to have them crap on it by doing their own stories with the Clone Wars. George Lucas said all that stuff's thrown out. I mean, you had all kinds of stuff that was happening in the comic books that they just changed. Asajj Ventress's origins or something. And here's the thing: is in some cases, not all, the Clone Wars cartoon show took some of those pieces from the comics that were already there, and then made them better. For example, Asajj Ventress, making her a Night Sister of Dothamer rather than a Ratataki. It was some alien race that had not been in the movies before, had anything to do with the Sith or anything like that. They tied her into the Sith a little bit more. That was interesting. I was kind of disappointed I wasted a bunch of money on the comics that portrayed her as a Ratataki. But, as one of our other good friends always says, it's all fiction anyway.
Right. And see, I think what you went through recently is what I went through probably back in the 80s and 90s with Star Trek. Star Trek has a lot of novels, probably more novels, if not as many as Star Wars.
I think so. Maybe not as popular. But
a lot of comic books. And as a teenager and a young man, between the Star Trek films, they would continue with the story, and they would all get erased because the next Star Trek film would take place days after the previous one. And so that was kind of a shock, and initially it was strange. But I was prepared for the changes this time. They say there's Trek fiction, and there is real Trek. And so there's Star Wars real and Star Wars fiction.
Well, here's what I'll say is what they should do is they should just cherry pick.
Okay.
They should cherry pick what's good and leave out what's bad.
Right.
And, you know, it's, I suppose what's good about the expanded universe,
Right.
I mean, is the idea that the dark side and struggles between the Jedi and the dark side is a cyclical, generational sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, if you have Anakin Skywalker falling to the dark side and Luke Skywalker having to redeem his father, it only seems then logical that someone in the next generation is going to have a fall and have to deal with that, and perhaps Luke or somebody else will stand as the person that has to then attempt to redeem that person. Now, I totally agree with you. I do not want to see what happened in the books happen on the big screen. Partly because I've already experienced it in some way before. So I don't want to see Jaina and Jason Solo and Anakin Solo, who's dead now, and then Ben Skywalker, and have Jason fall to the dark side as Darth Caedus for the same reason, which is you're like, what?
You're talking about. I know a little bit about it.
Han Solo marries Princess Leia. They have 3 children: Jason, Jaina, and Anakin. Anakin gets killed off because George Lucas said there's only room for one Anakin in my Star Wars universe. That's Hayden Christensen. And so Jaina and Jason live. Jason falls to the dark side, only to then have sort of Jaina become the sort of savior of the galaxy by killing her own brother.
See, and it's complete. It's beginning, middle, and end. It's tied up. Yeah, I don't think they need to even continue after that. You know, it's its own storyline. It seems perfectly fine.
So don't even pick up from where that is left off, because chronologically, technically, they probably could. The characters are the right age.
The audience would be so lost. The majority of the people, including the children, perhaps the main audience of Star Wars, is going to be so lost if they do that.
But they're picking up 30 years later as it is. You know what I mean? The characters are all old. There's the originals, Han Solo, Princess Leia, Luke Skywalker. Those actors are confirmed now. Mark Hamill, Carrie Fisher, Harrison Ford are all going to be reprising their roles, which I think is kind of cool. I want to see where they end up. Kind of want to see Mark Hamill, get back into shape and wield the lightsaber. I know people don't want the old people doing too much stuff, which I kind of agree. But
supporting roles.
I want to see a little, Luke in an Obi-Wan kind of role, and wield a little lightsaber action. I think that'd be cool.
Yeah.
But I think they need to change the configuration of the children just to something to make it identifiably different.
Right.
And one thing that's been talked about is having a female protagonist, which I think they're going to do just for the sheer novelty of it.
Right.
Although I'm not sure that that's the best reason to do it. I mean, I think Star Wars should address the dearth of strong female characters, at least in its own universe, if not in other sci-fi action things.
Right.
But Star Wars has always been kind of about fathers and sons.
Okay.
And my question is, what happens to that sort of dynamic when you make the young female the protagonist?
Right.
I think it has interesting possibilities. But how do you tie it in? And I think that's one thing that they should do is, like, we're talking about how they should sort of ignore the expanded universe. I don't think they should ignore the prequels in some way. I mean,
the prequel movies?
Of
course not.
I think a lot of them think, though, that a lot of people think those movies sucked. Don't mention them. Don't have any actors from those movies in the new ones. We should deal with them like they're the bastard children, right? Well, here's the thing:
you can't ignore it. Like sometimes the Friday the 13th movies or Halloween, those movies with not that much continuity, they'll neither confirm nor deny a certain installment. No, it's episode 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. You have to include it.
But it works only if whatever happens in episode 1 has resonance then, I think, in like episode 9. So what I'm saying is, like, there's a lot of elements that were good from the prequels, execution questionable, but that could come up in the new series. For example, the prophecy of bringing balance to the Force. I mean, that's gonna have to be dealt with.
What exactly was balance?
Well, George Lucas
if it's
says
half good and half
right.
evil. Is that really what you want?
Well, I mean, the problem is that because he was working backwards, he was sort of painting himself into a box, and he was sort of saying that the balance of the Force is the Sith being destroyed. Yeah, I know a lot of fans. A lot of fans are like,
the wording isn't right. With
well,
that.
I mean, Luke. I've seen Lucas explain it though. He says the Force is harmony,
Okay.
and the dark side of the Force, particularly the Sith, is like a stain on the Force, like disharmony. So in order to achieve balance, you have to achieve harmony again.
Okay.
And that means destroying the Sith. It's not like you must have evil to have good. It's not that kind of thing. Like there always must be Sith, there always must be Jedi. And I know a lot of people say that. Like it's like, oh, he killed, Darth Vader killed the last Sith, so now he's a Sith and his son's a Jedi, and now it's a balance. No, it's getting rid of the Sith. Lucas has said that.
Mm-hmm.
But
right.
a prophecy misread may have been. Yes. So, I think, and what are you going to do if you don't have Sith in the movie?
My idea was, we're jumping ahead a little bit here, was that they've kind of done these, I think they've done this several times in the expanded universe, is they encounter villains from another galaxy.
No.
Look, hear me out. Is that maybe if you have the good side of the Force versus the dark side of the Force, maybe they're dark side users from another galaxy, but they're not Sith lords. They don't realize it's the dark side. So it's still the Force versus the Force, but they could have something other than established Sith or established Jedi. I don't know. That's just throwing it out there.
My problem with that is the expanded universe has already had maybe about 4 instances of aliens from another galaxy coming in. And
even in Marvel Comics,
right.
did it.
Well, who were those guys with the pale skin and the dark hair?
The Nagai.
The Nagai, and then the Sea-Rook in the Truce of Baccarat, the Yuvitha in the Black Fleet Crisis, the Yuuzhan Vong, and the huge, 25-book series that Del Rey did. I don't need to see that.
Okay.
And I mean, but the trick is, what do you do? Because if, it's like, yay, Jedi versus Sith. It's like, wow, we were going to see that for like 6 movies. We saw it for 6 movies already. We need to see it again for 3 more. But at the same time, you have this sort of like wealth of background material too, from everything from Knights of the Old Republic to comics that have now taken place hundreds of years in the future, or like 100 years in the future with, I forget what it's called, but it features Cade Skywalker, who's like Luke's descendant.
I had tuned out of it at that point.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, the thing about it is what I think you want to see is something way from the past reemerge, or something that had to do with Palpatine and the lineage of the Sith resurface, but kind of in a new way or something, so that maybe it's something slightly different. But connecting to that prophecy stuff, because I think it's important to have these movies link up to the other ones in such a way that when you see them attached, you go, oh, we didn't just tack these on. These actually feel of a piece. And that was what was really clever about the prequels, is that we saw how the prequels led into the sort of original trilogy, and
for the most part,
and that there was these layers of heroic cycle. Now, I think Lucas got a little self-indulgent talking about, it's like music. It's like laying motifs over each other, and they'll be recognizable. And it's sort of like, you can't just keep repeating the same lines over and over again, George. This is where the fun begins. Like, it's like, oh my God, you got to come up with some new stuff in order to keep people interested.
Well, they will come up with new stuff now, because apparently they're going off of Lucas's notes, but we have new writers,
Mm-hmm.
new director.
A
Lucas
new
will have
a new studio.
he. You know, I don't know if he's being modest, but he says he will have very little involvement from this point. You know.
Probably, you know, J.J. Abrams is a pretty creative guy. He has not, although I will say that most of his movies have been derivative of classic movies rather than classic movies in their own right.
Okay.
But hey, he's making fantastic derivative, solid derivative movies. So you know that's about as much as you can hope for.
Right.
God, I hope I didn't kill my chances of getting cast by saying no.
Yeah.
But
you want to be you'd play a stormtrooper. You'd play.
are you kidding? I'd
someone in the background.
I'd play Salacious B. Crumb's like stool in the movie if I had the opportunity to do that. So I think I would like to see Luke's children as well as.
I'll argue with you on that. Just
you want to see Luke be Obi-Wan, totally celibate, not have any kids?
I think for the sake of continuity from the prequels,
You can't have him married.
maybe not. Maybe not. It's not a good idea. When the prequels came about, they contradicted a lot of the expanded universe stuff because Jedi in the books and comics did have families and children and long lineages and so forth, and then that was apparently erased in the prequels. But for the sake of continuity, I'm okay with Luke being this single old sage like Obi-Wan, who never settled down. But then what about Leia? Leia's supposed to maybe be a Jedi as well. I think Han and Leia must have kids, though.
Right. So Han and Leia have kids. Luke might be
Old Uncle Luke
old Uncle Luke.
that they go to get trained.
But I definitely think that it's probably one of his greatest students who has
His star pupil.
right, who falls to the dark side or something. Although that's been done in the expanded universe as well, between Kip Duron and Queller and even Jason Solo, if you consider him the student of Luke Skywalker. They all fell to the dark side.
Right.
So it's been done, but it would seem like that's the logical place for something, for conflict to start, at least. If
Starting
that's
point.
right.
Yeah.
So let's move on to some sort of let me ask you then, casting-wise, we know that the big three are returning, Han, Luke, Leia.
Right.
No official word on Lando,
Billy D.
Lando or Peter Mayhew, Billy D, or even the droids.
I think certainly Billy D. I would love to see him as the Chancellor of the Galaxy. I think that's
Lando Calrissian?
Yeah, he was the administrator.
And I'm the administrator of this
Cloud
facility.
City. And then
Welcome.
he got made a general.
Right. And
I
then
think that'd be kind of neat. I mean, he's someone you can trust.
you
right?
just want to see a black president in space now. Is
Yeah,
the
huh?
oh, okay? I'm all for that. All right.
Right.
I
No,
mean,
but
I
Billy
think
D.
Leia having served in that position makes sense, and that's what happened in the
Right.
books. So maybe not having that. I don't know. Mon Mothma.
But no one knows who Mon Mothma is outside of us hardcore fans. Do you know who Mon Mothma is?
Many Bothans died to bring us this vlog, Don.
There you go.
All right. Anyway.
So
okay.
Billy D. Anthony Daniels.
So you would bring them all back.
Just about. Anthony Daniels, I think, certainly, at least providing the voice of C-3PO.
Mm-hmm.
Warwick Davis is Wicket the Ewok.
Oh, shut up! Now you've gone too far. Well, I think R2, having an R2 and a Jedi are sort of iconic, and
Alone on a
right.
mission on a hostile
right.
planet.
So that happens.
Sure.
Now, how about more questionably? Do any of the prequel characters return as holograms
interesting.
or ghosts?
Right. Prequel characters?
Well, for example, Obi-Wan Kenobi, Ewan McGregor, in a sort of holocron, is what they call it, a hologram-esque giving advice. Do we see Natalie Portman, Luke and Leia find out that their mother is Natalie Portman? Do we ever see that?
I think they address that they were from Naboo and that they're some arguably royalty, just a throwaway line.
So maybe or a portrait in the background of their mother or something like that.
Might be kind of neat.
And maybe in her dominatrix outfit from the second movie.
Right.
Okay, all right. And how about here's one, Ian McDiarmid, Palpatine. Do you think he appears? The Emperor. Does he appear? Darth Sidious. Darth Sidious.
Right.
Does he appear as some sort? Not as a ghost, because I think that's a deal. The dark side people do not appear as ghosts.
Okay. Yeah.
Well, that's I think
they did in the EU in the Tales.
I know,
of the
but
Jedi.
I think
that's
what,
one that
I think what Lucas was going for is that the path to immortality was self-sacrifice and giving up your physical flesh in order to maintain the spirit, whereas the Sith did the opposite. You know, the Emperor's all decrepit and old, and the idea is that he was supporting with his power his flesh to keep it as alive as long as possible. You know, even though it was decrepit and you know, withered from the inside out. And the same thing with Darth Vader, keeping the sort of mechanical stuff, keeping his body alive at all costs. So the fear of death being part of the dark side, you know what I mean?
But where you're going with Palpatine
is that he appears as like a hologram, like a Sith holocron, giving evil. You're like, no.
Okay. Before I tuned out of the expanded universe in the early '90s, that was one of the things that turned me off to it. Was bringing back the Emperor.
Oh yeah, Dark Empire
in the Dark Empire comic.
You need to have a different.
Well, they also brought back Boba Fett.
Right.
And
nobody's dead. Nobody dies.
Yeah, I hate
there was no consequences.
That works in Star Trek sometimes, but not Star Wars. No, it was a real turnoff, and I was like, who the hell are they going to bring back next? Jabba the Hutt,
right?
Greedo.
They brought back Jabba's relatives. It would be like another Hutt. It was like who was like, I'm his fat uncle.
Yeah, no, I love Ian McDiarmid's performances in those movies, and the Emperor, and let's leave him dead.
Okay, do you bring back Darth Maul? Which they
Maul,
did in the Clone Wars. They brought back Darth Maul.
Yeah, the Clone Wars cartoon was abruptly canceled, and Darth Maul had been resurrected, and now he's alive, and they never tied up that. That's an interesting idea. I wouldn't be opposed to that. I thought Ray Park's martial arts moves were awesome. The design, the makeup, and so forth is superb, but I think it's not necessarily the same audience. The Clone Wars cartoon, a little more juvenile for children, and the Star Wars movies for all ages, that you might throw people for a loop if you bring back Darth Maul into this other medium.
I would live with it. I would live with it. I thought it was a bad idea when they did it with the Clone Wars, because just for exactly what you're saying about bringing back the Emperor, and it's like no, if someone dies, leave them dead. There's consequences. You know, you can't just. It's not a soap opera
and it
where
cheapens their death, obviously,
absolutely
from the previous installment.
But they already did it. They did it in the Clone Wars, and the Clone Wars is basically canon now. At least Lucas has kind of made it that way.
Okay.
So I would live with it if they did it, and I mean he's visually cool. They probably shouldn't have killed him off in the first one, because he was probably one of the best things about it, just from a visual standpoint and an action standpoint. So I would live with it, and it would bring a connection in there to the prequels, kind of. Although I could do without it as well. So, you know, I mean, it kind of depends if we ever get to see a tie-up with the Clone Wars cartoon, if we're ever going to get a sort of like direct to DVD, yeah, exactly, finishing up of those arcs or whatever. Okay, so I gotcha. You know, so you don't want to see Tamura Morrison as Boba Fett
or Jango Fett
3.0
or the clones,
right?
And
well,
anyone who's died.
So I think
we're in the films.
We're definitely going to see some kids of Han and Leia, at least. According to the breakdowns that have appeared online, although these can't be corroborated, there are at least 3 roles that we know of that are sort of a man in his early 30s, late 20s, early 30s, very good looking. And a woman of the same age, and then a younger male. Now, if you read the EU, that would seem like Jaina and Jason Solo and Ben Skywalker as the characters. The younger male being the 21. But recently, regardless of who the characters are, they've talked about some casting for that. They've talked about Ryan Gosling.
Well, that's just from this week.
From this week, Ryan Gosling in the role, possibly of that late 20s, early 30s male.
Okay.
And Zac Efron in the role of
Zac Efron. You don't even need to change his name. It's very Star Wars.
It's almost a Star Wars name in itself.
Mm-hmm.
But for some reason, I'm having a bad feeling about this.
Quoting lines again.
Oh,
over and over.
Well, what can I say other than that would be terrible
for both of these choices? See,
Gosling not as much as he's built up enough cred, and you know what? And maybe not even for Zac Efron. Maybe I'm being unfair, but and I know who's casting it, so I'm hesitant to shout out the names of the casting directors, but
you don't like that. It got a lot of negative feedback already online,
and they were probably listening. But it sounds like Disney going. The rumors could be totally unsubstantiated.
Right.
Ryan Gosling's agent has come out and said that that's a complete myth. Although it did come from Latino Review, which has been pretty solid on rumors before.
Oh yeah, they apparently broke the whole Khan reveal as the villain like a year before Star Trek Into Darkness came out.
They needed to break that as a
year before.
Who are they doing for Star Trek 2? Who's the most recognizable villain from Star Trek franchise?
Right.
That's my problem with this stuff though. Is that's how these executives think? Is they go we. And I understand they're the money. So if you're the money behind one of these big tentpole productions. You want to ensure that you're going to make your investment back, and one of the ways to do that is to get recognizable names who attract audience to see the show. You're going to spend.
Zac Efron. No, seriously.
Well, Zac, or somebody. You know what I mean? But here's the thing that I have a very, very strong feeling about this.
Not a bad feeling about this.
It's a strong feeling.
Oh, okay.
And the thing about it is that content will drive audiences into the seats. And at this point, Star Wars is
drive us into the seat.
Star Wars is such a recognizable name. You don't need to have any other name attached. When they made the original Star Wars movies, all the studio executives were scared S-less because Lucas cast 3 unknowns as his leads.
Right.
Mark Hamill, Harrison Ford, and Carrie Fisher. Nobody knew who those people were. But he got Alec Guinness, and he got
Peter
Cushing as the sort of British stalwart, tried and tested actors to be
authority figures,
to be in his ensemble. He knew that he wanted unrecognizable people because he's always tried to go for that. He didn't want people who were known for other things because he was creating iconic characters.
Okay. Or he just couldn't afford anybody else.
But I feel that, and I feel strongly that they could do the exact same thing for this. You don't need to have Will Smith. Well, maybe not Will Smith anymore. Jaden Smith. After Earth, I'm not sure. You don't need Brad Pitt in these movies to sell Star Wars. Star Wars sells itself already. And one of the other names that has been talked about was John Noble, who is in the Lord of the Rings franchise as Denethor, the Evil King. I wonder what role he's going to play in this movie. Not that that's bad.
King?
Right, he's probably going to be somewhere.
Well, you see, I didn't know who that was. So ideas like that, people who maybe have a nice body of work under their belt, but are not big stars.
Right.
I like that. Like Ewan McGregor and Natalie Portman, at the time, 97, when they were announced, were not big stars, but did have an impressive body of work.
Right. But it just smacks of these, and this review, Latino Review rumor broke. saying that Leonardo DiCaprio had turned down an opportunity to do the series, and he was rumored to be Anakin Skywalker too at the time, and when Episode 2 was coming out, but he turned it down these sequel movies to do Robotech.
Right.
Nothing against Robotech.
Yeah, I think that's fine. I think Leo is just what you were talking about. Leo's too big a name for this.
That's what it smacks
and
of.
I like Robotech. I think
who can we
cool.
get for these movies? And it's like they can't think of anybody in the 19 to 23-year-old range who's like popular. And they've worked with Zac Efron before in the High School Musical series. So like, let's get Zac Efron. You don't need to do that, Disney. Get a bunch of unknowns that you screen test, who work well together as an ensemble, who fit the roles. And my personal preference is that they are American, because I'm just sick of seeing another Australian or British person in it, and obviously they're going to be shooting in England. So I guarantee you they're going to cast some British person in one of these as Han Solo's son. Hello, Dad. I'm Han Solo's son.
If it's Tom Hardy, I think that would be cool.
Okay. Well, the thing is like whoever's right for the role, you can cast them. But that's ultimately the correct decision, but it doesn't have to be a name. You already have Harrison Ford in your movie, who's a bankable star, in a Star Wars movie, and to get those three back is a coup in and of itself, especially when Harrison Ford was like, Star Wars, Han Solo's kind of a thin character for me to play. Guess the money was pretty good though, huh, Harry?
You never know.
Yeah, well, but so I don't think you need to get anybody recognizable.
Yeah, I'll just sum it up that I agree that at least 2 or 3 of these leads, the actual leads, not supporting cast, should be relative unknowns, right? And the whole British American thing, I don't care. I'm not an actor, so it doesn't bother me that Brits are taking all the parts these days.
Yeah, just let them take. Yeah, well, yeah. Well, part of the reason that they are, and Australians are, is because they actually are pretty famous in their own countries first. It's just that they're not known to perhaps a wider American mainstream audience. So you're able to get those people, and they're kind of already accredited stars with the acting ability and star power, and you can put them into stuff, and people won't immediately recognize them and go like, oh, that's Joseph Gordon-Levitt in, playing Han Solo's son, or what, you know what I mean? But that's my argument too for having unknowns, as it were, is that you can actually go into a movie and actually just slip into the story with far more ease.
Like who had really known Chris Hemsworth before Thor, right? Little part in Star Trek, tiny little part. He is Thor. People love him now because of that, and even Chris Evans did Fantastic Four, but kind of, not a lot else, and now he's Captain America. So.
Yeah. All those actors have been in acclaimed works before. They were in these big sort of tentpole franchises. But, you'll get somebody who has been around, has been in a bunch of things, has not had like a thing that makes them immediately recognizable, and they'll become a star. Harrison Ford had done a couple of smaller roles and things when he was offered the part of Han Solo, and he became a bona fide, bankable movie star. He was nobody when he was cast as Han Solo. Remember his turn as the famous Bob Felfa in American Graffiti?
And more American Graffiti.
Right. No, nobody knew. You don't need those names. So, other than that, we already have sort of a dream team a little bit, as in nerddom with J.J. Abrams, Michael Arndt, who wrote is that right? He read Little Miss Sunshine?
Oh, that's what he did.
Yeah.
Right.
John Williams is confirmed coming back. Has been confirmed now. Things seem to be in place, as long as they listen to us about the plots and the casting.
Like you did for Man of Steel 2.
Right. We could talk more specifics on plot, but I think we've hit it at 40 minutes on our video today.
So we'll have to divide this into two halves again.
Yeah. Or we could just record it again and just say everything we just said, but in 10 minutes.
I'd rather record another episode in our next time.
All right. Well, we already are editing this part out. So,
Okay.
All right. Thank you again, and we'll see you back for another installment of
Where
the hell do we go from here?
Keep watching.
Thank you.